Welcome back to Method Cooking with David. Tonight we're doing another recipe based off the items I got in my grandparents' deep freeze. They're stuck at home with quarantine and they've got a freezer absolutely packed with food. So I'm stopping by, mask on, while they're upstairs and I'm in the basement, looking around at what kind of food they got and what meals we can put together. Tonight we're doing a chicken pot pie. So I found some chicken breasts, some frozen vegetable medley, some puff pastry sheets, got some chicken broth out of their pantry, onion, egg, and some green onion tops, salt, pepper, and then some flour, oil, butter, and some milk so we can make a cream sauce. We're going to start off with the chicken. Let's go. With the chicken pot pie, we're going to start with the chicken because it's going to take the longest, short of the cream sauce. We want to get the chicken in, cooked, and let it cool down before we start cutting it up into chunks. So we're going to start with the breasts. Again, this is one we got out of the freezer. Before we start cutting, we're going to trim it up just a little bit. There's a little bit of that fatty cartilage that connects the two breasts, which is not very tasty. Well, it's tasty, but it's not going to be good in your mouth because it's going to be really chewy. Trim off some of those extra fat chunks. And then from there, if you can see, this is a pretty thick breast. So we're going to take a knife and cut it down the side and come up with two pieces that are about the same thickness. That way they cook about the same time. We're going to get those spread out. We're going to get a little bit of salt and pepper on those. Maybe a little bit of granulated garlic and onion just because they both taste really good. We're going to let that seasoning sit for about 10 minutes and then we're going to go to a pan. A lot of people, when they make dishes like this, they'll take the chicken here and cube it up and essentially boil it to death. So you're not developing any flavor and a lot of times it'll be really overcooked. We're going to sear these in a pan so we'll kind of get like a crust on the outside. The same way like if you grill the chicken or grill the steak versus boiling a chicken or a steak, there's going to be a lot more flavor in the end dish. I shared it in previous videos, but I want to say it again just because it's the easiest way to prevent people getting sick. When you're handling fish, beef, hamburger, pork, especially chicken, you want to have a chicken hand and a clean hand. And by that, I don't mean like little claws like an actual chicken hand, but one hand that touches the chicken and one hand that stays clean. So as I'm flipping the chicken over to season it, I've got my dirty hand or my chicken hand, and I've got my clean hand that I'm coming in to apply seasonings. A pet peeve of mine, and something that kind of drives me nuts, and now that I'm sharing it with you, hopefully it drives you nuts too, is when you watch cooking shows, the chef or the contestant will be like, oh, look at this chicken, it's nice and raw, and then they'll grab like a fresh pepper mill, grab that bottom and just start cranking, and now there's raw chicken all over that. It drives me nuts when I see it because I know someone's going to get sick. So what I'm going to do is put all the seasonings on here because all of them are either out of a dish or shook out of a container. I'm going to add the pepper last after I wash my hands because again, cross-contamination is the easiest thing to avoid. So now that I've got my hands washed, I'm going to go to the pepper mill, nice and clean. Give it a couple cracks of black pepper on each side. And instead of washing my hands 40 times, now that I've got the pepper on, I'm going to grab the tongs and I'm actually going to use to flip the chicken in the pan to flip the chicken over. This is the plate I'm going to put the raw chicken on. So I'll rest the tongs there. A couple more cracks. Like I said, we're going to let that sit for about 10 minutes before we go into the pan with it. So I'll set the chicken there. Leave the same chicken tongs balanced on that pan so all the chicken germs and bacteria are all consolidated right there. I'm going to wash my knife, the cutting board, I'm going to cut up an onion, and then we're going to start in on the sauce. Now we're going to start on the sauce. So we're going to begin with a roux, which is equal parts fat and flour. We're using a mixture of vegetable oil and butter and just some all-purpose flour. Now that the oil and the butter is hot, we're cooking it over about a medium-high heat. We're going to bring in the flour and start mixing those together. What we're looking for is kind of a blonde, almost like cookie dough consistency. We're just going to keep stirring it until everything is fully incorporated. Once it is, we're going to cook it off, and that's going to cook out that flour taste and texture. And then we're going to cut in some chicken stock and some 2% milk. And to that, we will have a cream sauce, which we're using for this chicken pot pie, but you can actually use that across the board to make different cream soups instead of spending $8 for half a gallon of heavy cream. So now you can see it's a light golden blonde, and it's starting to bubble up if it sits there for too long. So that is perfect time to add a little bit of the chicken stock. And with the chicken stock, we don't want this roux to kind of lump up, so we're going to ditch this spatula and go with a whisk to make sure everything gets fully incorporated and we're not left with little flour dumplings. You'll see once I bring in that, a little bit of that chicken stock, it'll start to thicken up really quickly. You want to keep stirring because you don't want this to burn to the bottom. As it starts to clump up, it almost looks like bad mashed potatoes, which if you watch one of my other videos, I'll show you how not to make. Keep whisking that up and cook it just a little bit. And then as we bring in the 2% milk, we're going to do the same thing. Add a little bit, whisk it up so we don't end up with little dumplings. and keep adding it. The thing with the roux is even after you add the sauce and everything's incorporated, you need to bring the whole thing to a boil to kind of complete that cooking process of the flour. Otherwise, you're going to have a really dry, powdery tasting sauce and soup. And as simple as this is to make, it is just as simple to mess up. You want to be really careful, especially with any cream-based sauce that you're making, that you're constantly stirring and scraping the bottom because you don't want it to scorch. As soon as a small part of it scorches, the whole thing is going to taste horrible and like the worst burnt toast you've ever had in your life. When making a cream sauce especially, what I like to do is alternate between a spatula and a whisk. The whisk is making sure everything is incorporated well, and then when you go to the spatula, you're making sure that there's nothing stuck or cooking to the bottom. So what I'll do a lot of times is tilt it to the side really quick and pull down just to make sure I'm hitting every edge and every corner of the pot, as well as giving it a little spin move, because a lot of times you get into the same habit and routine of hitting the same spot in the pot, and a lot of times like this inside edge will get scorched. So it's come up to a boil, all the flour's cooked out. I did a quick little taste test just to make sure it wasn't grainy and was ready to go. At this point, you could also add a little bit of salt, but depending on what you're using it for and using it with, you might want to wait until kind of like that final stage before you start tasting and adjusting seasonings. So I'm going to turn off the stove, let this start to cool down just a little bit because I want it to keep cooking. I'm going to pull it off to the cold side of the stove. Keep stirring it for a little bit because being in a metal pot, there's going to be a lot of residual heat that's sitting there, and I want it to scorch after all the work we've put into it. Now that we've got the roux and the cream sauce finished, like I said, we're going to let that sit off to the side, cool down just a little bit, but we're going to keep it on the stove top so it doesn't get super cold. We've got a saute pan going on kind of a medium-high heat. Put in a little bit of olive oil. We're going to bring over the chicken. And like I said, we're going to sear that off just to develop a little bit of flavor. And we've got an oven-proof pan, so after we sear each side, we're going to finish in the oven at 350 for probably 7 or 8 minutes since they're pretty thin pieces. When you do put your pan in the oven, if you do, make sure it's an oven-proof pan, i.e. it's made out of metal or has a like a heat-resistant handle to it, because the last thing you want to do is have the entire kitchen and house smell like burnt plastic. And here we come with the chicken. Same idea with steak. Once you get it in the pan, you don't want to mess with it until it's ready to flip. And you'll know it's ready to flip because it'll kind of naturally release itself. While it's sitting in there, we're going to move it around just a little bit to make sure that oil hooks every side. Kind of works its way underneath. If you need to add a little bit more, not a problem. If it gets too hot, like I said in previous videos, you can either turn down the heat, lift it up for a little bit, or pull it off to the side. And roast that, or pan sear that for a little bit, flip it over, finish it in the oven, and we're on to the next step. So as far as know when it's ready to flip and it's going to pull off easy, you can see there's a little kind of a golden brown rim around the outside, and it's starting to go white up the side. That means that outside is cooking. The outside is going to be normally thinner than the inside, so that means it's going to start to release itself. So we should be able to really easily pull that off the pan and flip it. We've got that nice golden brown crust on the outside, which is going to add a lot of flavor rather than just taking chicken bits and boiling them to death. Now that we've got a nice sear on each side, we're going to slide this in the oven at 350. Like I said, it should only take 7 or 8 minutes. And when you do pull it out, make sure you use a hot pad or a dry towel so you don't scorch your hand. So now that the chicken is done and out of the oven, we're going to warm up the vegetables just really quick in the same pan. So we're going to do a little bit of vegetable oil. In my opinion, raw onions have a little bit too much of a bite, so we're going to bring in the raw onions and saute these just briefly. We're going to follow those up with a little bit of, or a couple handfuls of that vegetable medley. Again, I'm using a wood spoon because I seared that chicken, so we're going to get those delicious bits off the bottom of the pan. A little bit of salt is going to help bring out the flavor and help those onions cook up. After the vegetables start to get a little warm, I'm going to splash in some chicken stock. Not so much that it's going to be kind of a soupy, runny mix, but enough to kind of steam the vegetables and the onions into being fully warm or hot before we drop them into the cream sauce to finish our pot pie. Now the onions are hot, not quite caramelized, but they got a nice saute in there. We're going to come in with some yellow and some orange carrots, some cauliflower and some broccoli. It's going to be the vegetable portion of our chicken pot pie, as we're letting the chicken rest before we cut into it, because any protein that you cook, you want to rest so that when you cut into it, all the juices don't come flowing out. The vegetables are about halfway warmed up, so we're going to come in with a little bit of chicken stock or chicken broth. We're going to crank the heat up so we can almost cook out that broth, and it's going to help steam the vegetables to the point that they're going to be nice and hot going into that cream sauce. While those are cooking, I've got the cream sauce behind it that was sitting on low. I'm going to turn that up to kind of a medium low, so that's nice and warm. So we're going to put hot chicken and hot vegetables inside a hot sauce, and then we'll start putting the cups together. We've got the vegetables and the cream sauce both staying warm. The chicken is resting again before we cut it up, and now we're going to go for the base of the pot pie. So we have a nice ceramic dish, did a quick spray of Pam on the inside, and we've got puff pastry that we let sit out for about 10 minutes just so it was warm enough that we could mess with it and unwrap it. We've got one big piece and two small pieces. The two pieces that are small are going to go on the top. This bigger piece is going to go on the bottom. You want to make sure you tuck it all the way to the bottom. This is going to be the crust. As you can see, the two pieces on the side are a little bit longer, so we're going to go around the outside and kind of trim that excess. And if there's any gaps or spots on the front or the back, you can kind of trim off little pieces and fill that in. And then as it bakes, those will bake together, and you'll have a nice solid base crust. The puff pastry is in and formed to the inside of the bowl. One thing you want to do is kind of go around the outside and tuck in these little pieces that are kind of hanging down, just because if they're really thin, they're going to burn and cook really fast. So we're going to tuck those up, kind of like you see when Grandma makes a pie. And then before we go into the oven, we're going to take a fork and just do a few pricks around the inside and the walls to let air out as it starts to cook. That way there's not a huge obnoxious bubble in the middle that the pot pie filling is going to break through. So from there, you got the oven set at 375. I like to put this on like a cookie sheet tray so it's easier to get in and out than trying to grab and manipulate the small piece. And we'll see this in about 10 minutes. While the base of the chicken pot pie is almost done, we're going to get the egg wash ready. We're going to use that to brush over the top. It's going to give a lot more of a dark, rich brown color. When cracking eggs, a lot of people have heard, go on the side of the bowl or like the corner, but really the easiest and safest, not safest, but most efficient way to do it is just a flat surface and one hard crack down, and then 2 thumbs in, and it'll pop right out. Once the egg is out, we're going to come in with a fork and just give that a little spin. Doesn't have to be anything too crazy or too wild. We just want to get the yolk and the white incorporated together. And then once that's ready and the shell's out, we're going to put the topping in, put that puff pastry on top, give it a brush, and pop it back in the oven for a little bit. All different proteins have a different temperature at which they need to be cooked. Chicken is 165. So when you check it and you pull it out of the oven, put it in an instant read digital thermometer, wait till it hits at least 165 and then pull it. As you pull it out of the oven, the continual heat or the carryover heat is going to take that 165 probably closer to 168, 169, so you know it's going to be safe. As far as cutting it up, we're going to cut it into long or short slices, I guess, like that, just kind of rocking the knife back and forth. From that, we're going to go to that flat side. I love flat sides. We're going to do them in nice big chunks because no one wants to hunt for the chicken in a chicken pot pie. Now that we've got the sauce done, the vegetables, and the chicken diced, we're going to get everything mixed up in a bowl, drop it into the crust that we kind of pre-baked a little bit ago, put the top over it, a couple slits, pop it back in the oven for about 8-10 minutes, pull it out, and then it's time to eat. We're going to start a nice scoop of that sauce. Fill that with a ladle full of vegetables. Like I said, everything going in here is hot already, so it's not going to drop the temperature of anything. To that, we're going to bring in the chicken, and we start folding that together and see what we need to add to come up with a nice chicken pot pie filling. Just got it mixed up. Like I've said before, along the way you want to taste everything. It's good, but I think we're going to cut in a little bit of green onions, a little bit more salt, and a couple cracks of pepper, and then we'll be good to go. So I added the salt and the pepper, and then we've got some diced green onion going in. It's going to give it beautiful color and another level of flavor. So that, give that a nice stir. Maybe we'll do just another little dollop of sauce. So now I get everything mixed up. We're going to start filling that par-baked crust that we had. Once we get that to the top, I'm going to come in with that puff pastry to top it off, and then back into the oven. We've got the pot pie filled, that puff pastry over the top. We are going to brush it with a little bit of egg wash, but before we do, we're going to do some slices just really lightly over the top. It's going to help some of the air get out so it doesn't bubble up, and we end up with that nice golden crust. And now we're finishing with a little bit of an egg wash to give it that golden brown sheen that we're looking for in the end. We're going to pop this in the oven at 375 for probably another 7-8 minutes, and then we'll be good to go. And the pot pie is out of the oven. It's cooling down. Again, all the ingredients we used were out of my grandparents' deep freeze in the basement, a couple items out of their garden. When we drop it off, I know they're going to love it because it's one of their favorite comfort foods. Thanks for tuning in to Method Cooking with David, and I hope to see you next time. We have the bottom part,